Think you're showing empathy in your sessions? Maybe. Maybe you're missing the mark. Are you willing to take that chance? I'm willing to bet you care deeply about your clients. You're likely very compassionate. But that's not empathy. And you are probably trained to reflect, validate, and summarize. But those don't always land the way we think they might in making a client feel supported and understood. In TEAM-CBT, we take empathy very seriously. It's a measurable skill, and we talked about measurement last episode, so you can look that one up. And the 5 secrets of effective communication are the most reliable way to express empathy. So empathy is not a feeling or personality trait. It is a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned and strengthened with practice. That's great news for therapists and coaches because empathy is one of the most important ingredients for effective work with clients. A strong therapeutic alliance built on empathy and mutual respect is one of the best predictors of successful outcome. And in fact, a 2018 article in Psychotherapy confirmed empathy consistently plays a key role in client recovery. But empathy isn't just about being kind or compassionate. It's about showing your client you understand their experience. And in TEAM-CBT, we do this with precision. So when do we use empathy? Well, in short, throughout the entire therapeutic or coaching process. But we especially focus on empathy in the early stages. It's the foundation of everything that comes after it in team. And we do not move forward until we've earned a passing score, which is 20 out of 20 on the evaluation of therapy session sheet, just in the empathy section, or an A or A plus if we do a verbal check-in. But even after we do that with empathy, it doesn't go on the shelf. We use it anytime a client kind of becomes disengaged or defensive, emotional, or kind of feeling hopeless, maybe. If something feels off in general, empathy is the right place to go back to. We call this going back to empathy, not because we stopped being empathetic or caring, but we take the time to actually stop whatever method or tool we are using in that moment, and we go back to full empathy without trying to fix or solve anything. So, how do we do empathy? Notice the phrase do empathy, not have empathy. So compassion is something we have. It's an emotional connection, and that's great and wonderful. Compassion is lovely, but it's just a bonus, not a requirement. Crazy, right? I'm sure I'll get comments. And I invite your responses below, but be respectful and give me a chance. Just hear me out to see if any of this resonates with you. Again, it really is important and helpful if you genuinely care about your patients and clients. But in TEAM-CBT, showing empathy is a deliberate, learnable technique, not just a feeling. And this is good news because we don't always feel 100% compassion at any given moment in time. Sometimes we've had a rough day, poor sleep, or we're just not really connecting personally with the client. Let's face it, we're all human too, right? Some therapists even avoid seeing certain kinds of clients, aggressive clients or abusive clients, because they can't relate to them. But even the most vile perpetrator who is willing to change should be given the chance to try to change. It's a myth that you have to feel like your client would in any given situation. That's not true. We know what it feels like to feel sad, inferior, angry, anxious, and you can tap into those feelings even though the trigger might be different. So you're not aligning with bad behavior. Okay, I digress. So TEAM uses a set of tools called the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication. And if you've heard of any of David's podcasts, you've probably heard him talk about this. These 5 skills express empathy in a way clients really connect to. And we see this in our scoring. It's amazing, but more on that later. Some of this will be similar to what you've already been doing. So, hey, A plus for you. But some will be slightly different, more nuanced, and those nuances matter. And some might sound like outright therapy sacrilege. So these are taught to therapists a bit differently than we teach them to clients. We'll do another episode for 5 secrets in communication with clients, but today we're focusing on practitioners. Brief overview. The 5 secrets are disarming technique, which is finding the truth in what they're saying. Thought and feeling empathy. We use a client's own words to reflect back what they've said. I feel statements and self-disclosure, where we share appropriately feelings and ideas that might help us connect with the client. Stroking, where we convey an attitude of respect. We find something genuinely positive to say about the other person. And inquiry, where we ask gentle, probing questions to learn more about what the other person is thinking and feeling. It's a very connected form of questioning. There are communication tools that convey empathy and build rapport that we use alongside of 5 secrets, which you, I'm sure, are using, like pacing, silence, tone of voice, eye contact, paying full attention, body language, and so on. So let's explore those before we do a deep dive on the 5 secrets. So these additional techniques that therapists and coaches use to express empathy include emotional permission. This is where we let clients know it's okay to express difficult emotions without judgment. So an example might be a client is there and you can see them like trying not to cry, and you just simply say, "Hey, just let those tears flow. It's okay if they come." The next one is tone and body language. A calm voice when it's appropriate, or sometimes even being animated if the person's upset. Your posture, all of these send a message of acceptance and safety. The appropriate use of silence. These are like those quiet moments where we give space for the client to reflect or express their emotion with any kind of pressure to respond. These tools enhance empathy, but it's the 5 secrets that provide the clear structure to make sure it's not just felt, it's communicated. Most of these we use occasionally in team, and some of them we don't use at all, to be honest with you. I hate to break the bad news on that. Anyway, just a little side on that. So, I mean, I went to college for my counseling diploma. I don't have a master's or PhD, so I'm sure you can put that in the comments that that's upsetting to you that I'm proclaiming things on YouTube. But I have been extensively trained. I've been supervised. I've been supervised for over 4 years in counseling, and then I've done supervision for another few years to do TEAM-CBT. So, anyways, take it whatever you will. That's enough disclosure. All right. So, my point is, I have spoke to many, many, many therapists in trainings who have their PhDs. Some of them have masters, but most of them have PhDs, psychologists, professors, even at Stanford University. And most of them, if not all of them, I will say it's a very small percentage that don't say this. Most of them say what they learned in school was nothing compared to learning team, that they just really did not develop the skills to connect with their patients until they learned TEAM-CBT and 5 secrets. So take that for whatever you will. You can watch some of the Talking with TEAM-CBT episodes that we have, where we interview, Daniel and myself interview some of these therapists who have a lot of education, a lot of experience behind them from all over the world. So it's, yeah, I don't want you to just take my word for it. And in fact, don't even take their word for it. What I would encourage you to do is try some of these out. The caveat to that is they are pretty hard to learn. They sound super simple. You're going to think I'm nuts that I say they're hard to learn until you actually practice them. Anyways, let's get back to some of these other communication tools that are sometimes helpful. But like I say, some of them we're going to avoid in team. We'll walk through each one. But if you don't want to do that, if you just want to hear the 5 secrets, you can jump ahead and to the next chapter. So active listening. Of course, we're going to do active listening. This is where we pay full attention, maintaining eye contact, showing interest through body language. Great. It kind of involves minimal encouragers. The client just keeps talking. We don't need to interrupt. We don't need to give them any empathy if they're talking. And this is good for allowing a client to vent or emote. And sometimes I even like for an intake where the client's trying to tell me a story and I don't want to interrupt because I want them to be able to just process and tell me what's going on. But it's not the greatest for empathy. I know, crazy, right? Like you'd think you're just listening, but listening isn't empathy. Now, again, it is an important tool. We do need to listen. But I have found I've had to interrupt patients and clients. I don't call them patients, but a lot of my colleagues do. I've had to interrupt clients to give them empathy. And that sounds really strange to a lot of people's ears, both clients and therapists. But I'll tell you, my empathy scores go up if I do that. Whereas if I just let a client talk for like 20 minutes straight or half an hour straight without giving some five secrets, I don't get as good at empathy scores. They'll sometimes tell me they were really glad they could unload, and that's great. And that might be helpful in their therapeutic journey. Again, these are important tools. But I'm trying to distinguish that that's not the connection. That's not the empathy, which you're going to need if you're going to ask them to do some pretty hard stuff later on, right? So, like, exposure therapy. Another tool is reflection. This is where we repeat or paraphrase to show understanding. And if you reflect on feelings, we might call this feeling empathy, actually, in the five secrets. But if you're reflecting on statements, it can feel like you're just finishing the client's thought or sentence, which can be validating or can totally backfire. Had it go both ways. I've done this tool. So you got to get it right. We just don't always be able to, we can't always read minds, so we don't always get it right. I find this tool is helpful after I've developed good rapport, after I have the empathy or connection already. So let me give you an example of this, what this would look like. The client might say, I can't seem to do anything right lately. A therapist might respond, you're feeling really discouraged, like you're failing no matter what you're doing. So feeling empathy, spot on, but the second half may or may not land. Okay? Another one is paraphrasing. This is where we restate to the client what they said in different words to clarify meaning and kind of check in on understanding. Again, this will sound similar to thought empathy when we talk about thought empathy, but it is not. We tend to use different words when we paraphrase, not the client's words. So I would only, in team, I almost never use this. Honestly, I just don't. I don't use paraphrasing. The only time I might do that is if I'm really not understanding what the client is saying and I really do need clarification. And then I'll preface it by saying, listen, I want to really understand what you're telling me. I need some more information. I need to clarify. Are you saying, right? And then see how that lands with them. So let me give you an example. So client might say, everything I do feels pointless. I try, but nothing ever changes. The therapist might respond with, it sounds like you've been putting in a lot of effort, but it feels like nothing you do really makes a difference. So not a single word is the same. And again, we'll talk about this more when we talk about thought empathy, but I just want to point out how important using some of the key words that a client uses is critical in doing A+ empathy. Another tool we might use is summarizing. So I use this during intake sessions where we condense a client's story and kind of highlight key themes or important pieces that we might need some clarification on. Some therapists might use this to wrap up a session just before they assign homework, or like I said, I use it in intake. So client might share a lot of stressors, they might go on, and the therapist would say, so, sounds like things are really piling up for you. There's conflict at home, stress at work, and you're feeling like you just can never do enough. Another form of communication and tools that therapists use is Socratic questioning. Now, this is used in team quite a bit, actually, in TEAM-CBT and also CBT. And this is where we help clients to potentially challenge their thoughts. We would only do this in methods section. We don't consider this empathy in team. This is simply a method to help them with their cognitive processing. So, we can talk about that when we get to methods on this channel. But let me give you an example. So a client might say, they all thought I sounded stupid. And the therapist might say, well, what makes you believe that? Is there evidence that they saw it differently than you do? Another one I've heard therapists do quite a bit is interpretation. And this is where you offer deeper insight and meaning behind the client's behavior and emotions. It's like kind of holding up a mirror to the client so they can see their inner world. So it might sound something like, I always feel like people are going to leave me even when things are going good. The therapist may respond, I wonder if that fear might be coming from the early experiences where important people in your life weren't emotionally consistent. Again, this is not one we would ever use for empathy in TEAM-CBT. And I'll be honest, we almost never use this tool. We find it's just better for the client to get their aha moments. It's better for the client to direct the show. Um, yeah, and I know a lot of clients and therapists feel like, well, they're coming to a professional for professional insight to kind of unpack what's going on for them. And so if they're coming for that reason, then I can see this tool being quite helpful. But I have found even when clients have come to me for that reason, and I've referred them out, but they've said, no, no, I still want to work on this thing, and I want team to do that because I watched one of David's podcasts. So then I'll say, okay, fine, they're seeing their other therapists, and um, often once we've actually got through the model and we've worked on self-defeating beliefs and things like that, they end up finding this was just not important. They really didn't need any kind of expertise for me in terms of them understanding themselves. That makes sense. The expertise that we bring as therapists in team anyways is that we guide the client into understanding themselves more fully rather than proclaiming that to them. Another tool that's often used in therapy is validation, where we acknowledge the client's internal experience as understandable or legitimate. So, client might say something like, I'm such a failure. I should have done better. And the therapist would say, sounds like you're holding yourself to a really high standard because you care so much about doing things right. That's just how much you value doing your best. We do something similar to this particular example called positive reframing. Again, we don't do it in empathy. It's an agenda setting process, and we do it quite specifically. So we would always offer this as a suggestion. Maybe I wonder if anytime we might feel like we have some insight that we want to share with a client, whether it's validation or interpretation, um, in team, we always do it with an attitude of, I just kind of had this thought, almost like it's a like off the cuff thing, because we don't want the client to think we're professionally, they trust us. Our professional word means a lot to them. They see you as an authority. And so when you say something, it's not just your musings, right? They're going to take that very seriously. So it's important we add bookends or some kind of buffer so they understand that this is a suggestion, a possible insight that they could maybe muse on. And it's totally okay if they don't think it's that. Normalizing. This is another one you see therapists use, right? This is where you help clients to see their experience as common or even expected. Client may say something like, I feel anxious even when things are okay. And the therapist might say, that's a common pattern for people who've been stuck in survival mode. Again, not used a lot by team therapists in an empathy situation, but can be used during psychoeducation discussions, and when it feels clinically relevant. Certainly, we want you to use your clinical judgment, and how you're trained and how you're working with clients. We just want to separate that these have a very specific use. These are specific tools that therapists use. So I know I said the part about the client and therapist. So an example of normalizing, a client might say, I feel anxious even when things are okay. The therapist may respond, that's a common pattern for people who've been stuck in survival mode. We typically don't use normalizing too much in TEAM-CBT. Again, it will depend on your clinical judgment when you think this is appropriate and necessary. Just want to point out these are not empathy tools. These are other types of therapeutic tools. Another therapeutic tool used in communicating with a client, but it's not empathy, is psychoeducation. And this in TEAM-CBT, we do. This is where you provide information about symptoms, treatment, or brain function. It can help empower the client, give them hope, or facilitate working together. It's very important during the consultation with a client because you want to set the stage of how therapy works and what they can expect, or just before a particular method to explain why you might use that method or how that method is going to work. An example of this might be clients asking, why am I anxious when there's no danger? The therapist might respond with something like, anxiety is your brain's alarm system. Sometimes it misfires even when there's no real threat. We'll use a three-prong approach to deal with these misfires. Exposure to rewire the brain, so to speak, cognitive work to reduce the anxiety through realistic thinking, and the hidden emotion, where we look for something that might subconsciously be affecting you, that's it's been bothering you, upsetting you, and you've been kind of ignoring it, and it's fighting to get noticed. Of course, there's all kinds of other kinds of psychoeducation we might do with a client, a very important tool. Another one is therapeutic feedback or insight. This is maybe very similar to some of the other ones we've talked about, but it's where we give an honest observation in a caring, collaborative way. You know, like, I noticed your tone when you mentioned your father. um, Tell me what it's been like with you to have a relation with him. So we may use some of this kind of intuitive type communicating with a client, and it could be used in conjunction with Five Secrets, but itself isn't one. And of course, there's problem solving, which I think most therapists are pretty good at not jumping into, although it's one of the ones I have trouble with. I like fixing things. I like solving problems. That is definitely not empathy. And it's something I think our clients really experience when they try to share something that's been going on with them with a friend or family member. Friends and family want to fix it. They want to fix the problem, right? They don't want to just listen. So just listening sometimes isn't enough either. They need that empathy connection. But then on the other side of the coin, they don't need problem solving. So you have like just listening on one side, and you have fixing it on the other side. And in between, what the client really needs is empathy. I need to be able to express what's going on for me. I need someone to reflect back in a way that they know, they understand what I'm going through. And then once I have that connection, then maybe we can get to problem solving later. I will say problem solving can rear its head if that tends to be your like go to. It can flare up during the empathy portion of working with a client. So just be mindful of that. If that's something you notice about yourself, you like to fix solutions, maybe you're brief solution focused, or use these kinds of tools where you can really get to work helping a client. And sometimes we want to help them too soon. Another one, I know this isn't going to, okay, so I'm trying to figure out a way to describe this next one. It's not really a technique that's taught in school, but it's one that I hear therapists do. So I'm kind of going to call it like empathy statements. It's kind of where you communicate sort of this understanding of the emotional pain, but in a sort of like this proclamatory way. So, you know, it's similar to feeling empathy that we do in team, but there's this like nuance that's very different. So let me give you an example. So a client might say something like, you know, after the miscarriage, everyone told me, just try it again, like it wasn't a big deal. And the therapist would say something like, that must have been incredibly painful to go through such a deep loss and feel like no one really saw how much it hurt. Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds really affirming. And like reflection and like paraphrasing, this may or may not land. Client might be like, yeah, you've really got it. But when we just proclaim how they feel, and they don't feel exactly that way, like maybe they don't, maybe the word hurt isn't the same, maybe disappointed or lonely is how they're, maybe they connect more with those words. It can just feel a little flat. I'm like, oh, are you telling me I should feel hurt? Are you? And I've even had clients say that to me. Oh, like, you know, when I've not used feeling empathy quite, or yeah, feeling empathy quite right. And I've done something more like this where I'm like, oh, sounds like you're, you know, you must have felt da da da, like, or must have, or sounds like you are. These sort of like declarations. Um, yeah, clients can take that to mean, oh, I'm supposed to feel that way, rather than you're connecting with them and their feelings. Okay. Another technique therapists use in communicating is affirmations, or sometimes called strength spotting. And anyways, this is where we would highlight the client's resilience, their values, the things that it took them courage, right? Like it took courage to face this. This could actually be used a little bit like stroking, what we'd call stroking in team. If it was very specific and and of course genuine, well, I'm going to assume a therapist will always be genuine. It's just that sometimes these responses can sound a little cookie cutter like. So, anyways, most of these are very useful communication tools, but they are not a substitute for deep personal connection. The five secrets are designed to bridge that gap. So, with all of that, let's dive into these five secrets of effective communication. So a caveat to this, like we're going to break them down into individual little pieces so you can understand them and learn them, but they can sound scripted or weird if they're not practiced. They can also sound very simplistic and like, oh, I'm already doing that, unless you get feedback from someone. So take all of that with a grain of salt. Also, they sound much better. They flow much nicer when you can use two or three at the same time. Also, we generally use 2 to 4 of them for any given response, and we would use all 5 if there's a rupture in the therapeutic alliance or if the client is feeling frustrated, angry, or getting defensive with us. All right. The very first one is called the disarming technique, and this is where we find the truth in what the other person is saying, even if it's difficult to hear. This is not a relativism, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. So a client might say something like, I feel like you're just jumping into problem solving instead of listening to what I was going through. A disarming response would be, you're right. I focused too quickly on a tool instead of staying with you and your feelings. That probably felt dismissive. Well, there, add a little feeling empathy too. It's pretty hard for me just to do one of these at a time. So this is not about just agreement to be polite. This is about identifying very specifically and acknowledging what the client is expressing. Sometimes you have to find the meaning behind the message, so to speak. We want to find out what's actually true. This is not, again, this is not relativism. This isn't like, oh, I could see how you thought I meant that. Find what they're actually saying. So sometimes this can be quite difficult to figure out what they're really saying. Sometimes it's very obvious what they're saying, and you have to find out what you agree with. If you can't agree with it, you don't, right? If someone says something very derogatory or racist or hurtful, you don't have to find the truth in it. It does help if there's a barrier and a defensiveness, especially when we're teaching clients. But it is one of those things where if you can't see the truth, you'll have to skip this one because there's no way to shortcut this. Let's put it that way. All right. Some common challenges to disarming technique include being defensive in response, fear of losing credibility, or like difficulty letting go of our version of the truth. So some of these can get in the way of disarming. The second one is thought and feeling empathy. Thought empathy is when we restate what the client said using their own words as far as possible without sounding like a parrot. And this leads me to briefly say in TEAM-CBT, we take a lot of notes because it's very important for us to say what the client is saying. I have met some therapists who are very skilled with their memory and they're able to do thought empathy without taking notes is very rare in all the people I've trained. I can only think of 2 or 3 who can do it. So just a caveat. Now, this gets back to we talked about eye contact earlier and how that's an important part of human connection. And even I've had clients say to me, I feel like you didn't give me enough eye contact, didn't feel like we were really connecting. And so I've discussed a little bit about, finding that balance between note taking and eye contact and making sure I get what they say. And we were able to work through that quite easily. The client, I just had an open conversation with them about why I take notes. They were totally understood and felt really heard and understood that I even addressed that issue on the evaluation of therapy form, which is why that form is so important. Again, go back and watch our other episode on testing for that one. Anyway, so thought empathy, we want those. So what I kind of teach therapists to do and coaches to do is write down really keywords like names of people, any emotions that come up, any adjectives, those kinds of things. So you can use those words when you give back that thought empathy. And feeling empathy is in the same category. For me, it sounds like there's 6 secrets of 5 effective communication, but I'm not the one that labeled it. Oh, we're just gonna go with this. David kind of keeps the thought and feeling empathy together. But anyways, this is where we acknowledge what the client might be feeling based on what they've been sharing. And they may actually directly express how they're feeling. I was so frustrated, or I was so depressed. And then you just repeat those words. I don't try and sugarcoat any of the words that they say. But sometimes they don't actually articulate a specific feeling. So then we might give a guess. We call it multiple choice empathy. I'm like, oh, it sounds like you might have been feeling disappointed or maybe inferior, maybe embarrassed. Tell me more. Like, what were you feeling? So kind of throw it out there for them.
Example for this one might be client says, I have tried everything and nothing's working. A thought and feeling empathy response might sound something like, you've been putting in so much effort. It sounds like maybe you feel stuck and overwhelmed, or maybe frustrated and down. Some of the challenges with thought and feeling empathy is, again, changing their words too much, adding too much, like insights or solutions. We don't interpret, we don't reflect. We're just going to share back what we do reflect. I shouldn't say that. I like the word reflect. We reflect back. One of the challenges that we see therapists make is they have a hard time with anger if the anger is directed at them. This happens in therapeutic situations. They may have been upset about billing, or something got canceled, or they struggle with the technology and getting onto their telehealth appointment. And the therapist, they want to, fix a problem. No, well, next time we'll make sure the Zoom link is whatever. We're trying to fix it instead of being like, oh, sounds like you're angry. That totally makes sense. You'd be angry. That you could, and it seems like anger is just a word therapists have a hard time saying when it relates to themselves. This is true of clients too. Like they may not be able to express that they're angry to like someone else if we were teaching them the 5 secrets. But I have a course called Anger Practice. So for people who've already kind of learned a little bit about the 5 secrets and they want to practice what that might sound like with an angry client or a racist client or a client that maybe comes on to them sexually. It's these uncomfortable, awkward things that clients may do over the course of our practice. So anyways, that can be a challenge to share that feeling for some reason. All right, the next one is an I feel statement or self-disclosure. This is where we express our own feelings in a very respectful and professional way, and it may include a brief, appropriate personal disclosure that's relevant. This one gets a lot of pushback from therapists because they're like, wait a minute, we've been taught the session is all about the client, and don't bring up anything. You've got to have boundaries, professional boundaries. Don't let them in on anything too personal. Like that's not right. Um, I'm not sure where that comes from. There's no law out there that says you can't share a personal detail with a client. Obviously, we don't want to go on and on about our kids and our husband and like whatever, right? Like that's not what we're saying here. So let me give you some examples and then we'll talk a little bit more about it again. So here's one where the client might say, you probably think I'm just weak. So one way to do a little bit of feeling empathy might be, actually, there's been times where I have struggled with feeling inferior, and yeah, did kind of get the impression other people are going to think I'm weak too. It's pretty hard to open up about those feelings. I'd love to hear more about that. I'm not going to give you a bunch more examples. This will come out a little bit when I do like the whole package of 5 secrets. It's really quite an intuitive process, and done with respect and very specific to a very specific situation and a client. So, but let's talk about some of the mistakes people might make. Well, the first one, this would be more coaches would make this mistake, is therapists typically have been trained to not do self-disclosure and I feel. So they typically don't make this mistake, but coaches may. And that's where they kind of start talking about too much, start to kind of take over the session. And even if it's just like a paragraph of talking, like even if it's just like, I don't know, 30 seconds, that can be too much. So really self-disclosure, I feel, is like 1 or 2 statements. I will say sometimes I have gone longer with clients, especially during methods section. Um, yeah, so it depends. Like there've been clients, especially if I'm doing faith-based work, where clients might be like, I don't think God could ever forgive me or ever be close to God. And so I may do some disclosure about my relationship with God in that situation because it's very specific and relevant to that client in that situation. But it always serves a purpose. Here's how you know the correct way or when. You're going to disclose something because it shows that you're connecting with that client on that very specific feeling or moment. And it may even be event related if a client has had a miscarriage and you've had a miscarriage. So it might be event or trigger oriented, but usually it's emotion oriented, feeling like depressed or anxious or those kinds of things, but some kind of struggle. And this has been a game changer for a lot of therapists, they've told me their scores have just skyrocketed when they started doing this. I know clients have told me in their surveys and even verbally that they just feel like I totally get them. And they were shocked that someone is put together as me would have had these kinds of negative thoughts or feelings. Another one that I've heard several times from clients is they felt so much hope. They're like, wow, if you felt that bad before and now you're doing this to help others, there's got to be hope for me too. So it serves a point. And then we keep it brief, very relevant and appropriate. So I do give details because I think you can be too general, like, oh, I have felt sad too. That's not an I feel statement, okay? That's not self-disclosure to say I felt sad too. But you could say, I lost my dog 5 years ago and it was heartbreaking. It took me like a year and a half to get over the rough part of it. And even now I still think about him from time to time. Tell me what how has it been? Like I know Roscoe meant so much to you. What's it been like living without Roscoe? What kinds of things have you missed about him? Tell me more. So that inquiry takes the lens from being on me back to the client, right? So I've shared something relevant and appropriate, but then I hit it right back with an inquiry right away to direct it to the client so they can share more about how they're feeling. Let me do a caveat to that. I have said to them so I've shared something. Let me give you, I don't try not to get too specific here because I'll give details. I've shared something about wanting to end my life. I'm not sure how much YouTube will take out of there, but anyways, feeling very dark. And the client has just really expressed how, wow, like they couldn't imagine someone like me having those thoughts and feelings. And it was so helpful. And if they say so helpful or something along those lines, I might say, well, what was impactful about that? Like, how would that be helpful to you? To tell me a little bit about that. Just because it may draw on some of the tools that I used in that moment that might be helpful to that client. So maybe it was that I showed how some evidence helped me straighten out some of my negative thinking, and they'd be like, yeah, I really connect with that. So then I know this client really likes examine the evidence. Yeah, I could put a lot of caveats. Like we're trying to be, this is not going to be a quick YouTube. I'm trying to make this quick. Okay, well, let's just keep going. You kind of get the point, right? So one other error, though, I got to touch on is kind of avoiding giving any kind of I feels or self-disclosure out of the fear of being too vulnerable or thinking nothing you have to share would be important. I was working with a coach and they were just really struggling with this. They did they did lots of thought and feeling empathy, but they really didn't do much I feel. And so we had to work on this quite a bit because we don't want to avoid really connecting with our clients. All right, and the next one is stroking. I do not like this word. David loves kitty cats and he loves stroking and petting kitty cats, and I so that makes me like it better, but I don't want to stroke someone. I don't know. It just anyways, it's basically conveying respect and finding something genuinely positive or admirable about the client, even when we're struggling. And it might even be expressing some kind of affirmation like in a 15-minute consultation, I might say something like, "Oh, I'd really enjoy working with you." Okay. Something like that would be stroking. Let me give you an example. So a client might say something like, "I completely lost it. I yelled at my kids again." It's so hard not to give all 5 of the 5 secrets here. I'm just going to demonstrate stroking. Okay. So with that, the fact that you're talking about this and sharing, and that the fact that you've been working with me so hard, it shows how much you care about being a good parent. The fact that you feel so guilty. Yeah, so just hard to do only one. You can see I slipped in a feeling empathy. Okay, let's go to the last one, inquiry. This is where we ask gentle, open-ended questions to better understand the client's thoughts and feelings. Can you tell me more about what was going on? Or what was the hardest part of that for you? That one might be a little leading. I try to be pretty general with inquiry. I don't want to be overly specific because it might steer the conversation, and that's not what my goal is, especially in empathy. Now, if it was a different situation, like an intake, then I might use clarifying questions and other kinds of open-ended questions. But for empathy, I really want to let the client go wherever they need to go. So now let's do some examples where I use the secrets more naturally. So I might use 2 or 3 or 4 and maybe all 5. So we'll do some examples. I'll give you like a little vignette. I'll do what the client says, and then I'll follow up with what I might say. Okay. Example number 1 is Julie, a 48-year-old mother who lost her son in a car accident. And she might say something like, I just can't move on. I'm angry at the drunk driver, but I also feel so lost and hurt. It is so understandable that you can't move on and that you're angry at the drunk driver and feeling lost and hurt. I feel deeply moved hearing how much pain you're in. Would it be okay sharing more about what that's been like for you just day to day? Example number 2, depression and self-criticism. David is a 35-year-old man struggling with depression. I am tired of pretending to be okay. I'm a burden to everyone. Maybe it'd be better if I just disappeared. Pretending to be okay has become exhausting and you're feeling like a burden, and like disappointing might be the only relief. That sounds incredibly painful and lonely. I feel concerned because I've had thoughts myself and I know where that can lead. Can we explore more what those thoughts have been like for you recently? Have you had other thoughts about lending your life? Before I jump to the next example, of course, and I don't need to say this to everyone that's trained, but just in case people are watching that aren't trained, we would also do a full suicide assessment if a client brought up anything like this. Example 3, a relationship conflict. Melissa is a 29-year-old woman who recently ended a long-term relationship. I don't think you get it. I have been gaslit for years, and now I feel like I don't even know who I am. Response might be, you're right. I'm not getting it. After years of being gaslit, you've been left feeling like you don't even know who you are anymore. And I can imagine you feel angry, maybe even angry or frustrated or lonely and misunderstood. I feel sad. I've been gaslighting you too. I appreciate your willingness to share something so direct and honest. Would you be open to telling me what I'm missing? Like, what has this experience really been like for you? Try not to smile too much because I wouldn't smile doing these with a client, but I want to smile for you guys watching. Okay. Example 4, parenting guilt. Brian is a 41-year-old father of 2. I yelled at my daughter again last night. I feel like I'm ruining her. What kind of dad does that? Yelling at your daughter last night's left you feeling like you've ruined her and you're questioning what kind of dad you are. I see you really care and love your daughter and want to be a better father. I can imagine you feel upset and disappointed, down, or maybe even incompetent, guilty. Can you tell me more how you were feeling and what this has been like for you? Example 5, social anxiety. Sarah is a 22-year-old university student with social anxiety. She might say something like, I know it's irrational, but I always assume people are judging me. I hate how anxious I get over nothing when I'm around others. A possible 5 secrets response could be, it's like no matter how much you know it's irrational, the anxiety still shows up and you hate how intense it gets over what seems like nothing. That sounds like it's exhausting and frustrating along with feeling anxious. I imagine you might also feel alone when you assume people are judging you. Did I get that right? Example 6, trauma and shame. Carlos is a 50-year-old man with a history of childhood abuse. I've never told anyone this before. Part of me thinks it's my fault. I should have done something. Therapist response, child abuse is something you've kept to yourself, and part of you still believes it's somehow your fault, that you should have done something. It sounds incredibly painful, lonely, and upsetting. I feel conflicted. Part of me wants to console you and validate what you're going through, to tell you it's not your fault, but I also want to hear more about your experience and what you've been going through. Tell me more. What has this been like for you? Okay, I admit all of these feel a little less than ideal because they're not real. There's just something I can't convey on a video. And even if I had a demo person here, it might be a little better, but it's just really hard. So if you'd like to see me do this real, visit my website, TEAM-CBT. I'll put a link in the description where I do a live session with another coach and we do some personal work. and they've given permission for you to see that. So link in the description. All right, so let's summarize this. So in TEAM-CBT, we use many tools to help our clients, just like other therapeutic tools. But the 5 secrets of effective communication stand out as something that really consistently builds trust, connection, and emotional safety. There's just this amazing empathetic cornerstone as team. Many techniques can support the process, but few create that sense of like really being known and understood. And that's what empathy really is. It's not just saying you care, saying you get it, saying, oh, I understand, but demonstrating that you do. I can't tell you how many clients have reported to me that they finally feel heard and understood after years of therapy with other therapists. One client said they'd been to over 6 therapists. I've actually had more than one client say that over many, many years, and felt like they finally felt understood with me. And I got to tell you, I am not really a touchy-feely kind of person. I'm quite a left brain. But they were able to just feel so connected with me because I used these 5 secrets. What's so awesome is we were able to move forward dealing with anxiety and things because they trusted me, and then they trust the process. If they can trust you, they trust the process. So if you're a therapist or coach and you'd like to master these 5 tools, they're not just going to improve your ETS scores, which we talked about last episode, but often tools and methods fail because the client isn't sure you really understand. Do you get it? Do you know what they need? Because they haven't felt 100% supported and heard. When clients know you really get them, it inspires hope and confidence, allowing the client to move forward because recovery requires hard work. And they need to know deep down in their soul, you've got their back.